Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rehman, live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the economy of Pakistan. A couple of very interesting developments regarding the visit of the IMF delegation. But they met the people from the Federal Board of Revenue and other institutions regarding the economy and the kind of picture which has been presented. I mean, there are a couple of very interesting facts about it. Obviously, when we talk about the rising inflation, the projection is that it is going to hover around 12.5 to 13%. So that's pretty high. This is the forecast for 2020. And when we talk about certain other debts and their ratios, we'll also be throwing light on that aspect. As we all know that since the imports, they have shown a very considerable, I would say, downward trend. And that is the primary reason that when we talk about the debt, the difference between primarily the imports and the exports, that has also reduced. And according to this report, it has gone down around 80% in certain cases. Then we'll be talking about the economic growth rate. Now, that is something we need to worry about, because when we look at the region, whether we compare ourselves with India or Bangladesh, even Bhutan or Nepal, even Afghanistan, our growth rate that is, kind of expected at around 2.4 to 2.5%. That is very low, much lower than the projected target earlier. So that is primarily another very important area of concern. As far as dollar is concerned, there were certain reports, and I was reading an interview of Malik Bostan Sahab, who's the person looking after these affairs, and he was saying that currently the dollar is around 155, 156, and it should come down to the level of 145, 146 in the coming months. Obviously, once this IMF money is going to pour in, there's going to be less pressure on the dollar. Plus, the major reason was primarily regarding the imports. There were lesser imports, so less demand for dollar. So that is primarily another reason for that. But there were a lot of other areas also mentioned in the report. So we'll be talking about that. Let me introduce you to our panelists. We have with us in our studio on my right is Dr. Faisal. She's a senior economist. Thank you very much, ma'am, for taking out the time and being part of our show. We have with us Shakil Rameh Sahab, again a senior economist. Thank you very much. And we'll be also talking to Dr. Waqar Ahmed Sahab, who is from SDPI. So we'll be also taking some input from him. But ma'am, starting off from you, let's start off from this IMF report regarding the GDP. That says that it is going to remain around 2.4%. Now, this is the lowest in the region, ma'am. Even Afghanistan is doing better. Sri Lanka, India is around 6.9% according to them. And a couple of other countries hovering around 3.3, 4.5. Bangladesh, all these regional countries are doing exceptionally well.
Well, as far
other than Pakistan. Now, let's throw light on this aspect, ma'am.
Yeah, as far as India is concerned, I think the figures are fudged. And well, the growth rate certainly over there is also dropping. But that does not give us any reason why our growth rate is not it's not responding to the kind of measures that which has been taken. So it was expected that the growth rate is going to fall, but really in the coming days we should see some kind of improved economic activity and improvement in this
What sort of
rate.
economic activity do you see improving?
Because you see the ease of doing business, that according to the World Bank's latest report has improved, and on ground also there have been some improvements in the in the processes which to start business, as well as acquiring, let's say, other facilities to do business in Pakistan. So I mean, on that front, maybe the business activity can pick up. Of course, then the tax structure, some minimal kind of improvement is taking place, but the response from traders is unfortunately not as was expected. It is.
Is it primarily, when we talk about the tax collection, that is one of the most important areas.
Yes.
And when you look at the tax to GDP ratio, that's very low again in our country. Now, in order to improve that, you need to implement certain taxes. You need to improve the percentage of tax, and again, the collection and the willingness of the people, that plays the most important role. In this case, I mean, the traders, they are going to go on a strike in the coming days.
Yes.
And a lot of problem is going to be there, along with Maulana Sahab coming on the roads and doing all these dharnas. But the point is, again, ma'am, when you talk about this kind of reservation from the most important side, traders I'm not talking about the manufacturers, or I'm talking about the retailers or the wholesalers for that matter. You know, their input is not even 1% when it comes to the total share, and look at the kind of money they make. They prefer to trade in cash rather than
Yes.
in the form of plastic money for that matter,
Yes.
because they don't want to be documented.
They
They're
don't
not
want to
even
be
ready
documented.
to have certain deeds
So
done
it doesn't
on
really
the identity
exactly.
card. They don't even want to show their identity for that matter.
Even if you simplify the procedures, if the person paying the tax is simply not willing to pay the tax at all, or simply not ready to be documented, you have a very big mismatch there. So I mean, the reasons behind that are multiple and severe. But yes, in the short run, I believe that this kind of problematic situation will persist for a year. So you will see improvements, and that, according to IMF report, also will happen in 2020. You see, what has happened is that we are trying to change the nature of our economy from a consumption-oriented economy to more productive side. So I mean, that kind of shift really takes some time, but honestly, during that time, I think things could be managed a little bit better. And that would really, be very helpful for, so that the common person doesn't have to take that much
Now moving on
impact.
to Rami Sahab now, when we talk about the economic growth, obviously if it is slowing down, resulting in so many areas to sort of have negative impact on them. For example, if you look at the industry, either you're closing it down, just look at the car manufacturing for that matter. You talk about Toyota, you talk about Suzuki, you talk about Honda. I mean, look at the level of production that has gone down. You're talking about unemployment. You're talking about so many other factors that will eventually result in a lot of pressure on people. And secondly, at the same time, so when you look at the other factor, that inflation, that is around 12 to 13%. Pretty high. We used to talk about double figures. Now it's well beyond that mark also. Curbing that either through the monetary policy, obviously that is hindering your growth rate. And at the same time, when you look at those factors for that matter, that ease of doing business, expecting people that they'll come and invest in Pakistan, no matter what sort of a conducive environment you've provide them or you plan to provide them, still it is going to take a lot of time. So,
Faisal, thank you for inviting. The problem with our economy is, for me, if I start from here, we don't try to comprehend the economy. We try to discuss bits and pieces. But economic system is a holistic system where a number of things happen. One thing. Second thing, if you look at the global level, the IMF projection is that the growth rate of global level would be down from 3.2% to 3%. It's a projection of IMF. And further they are indicating in 2020 there may be the decrease in growth rate 0.8%. That means the global economic system, so growth rate is slowing down. The major reason, so which World Bank report identified, they said the productivity. So there is a fundamental things which we need to understand. IMF on one side, they are promoting the financial management. IMF is promoting the financial management, but they are trying to venture for advices in other sectors like production sector. So that really creating problem. IMF is, for example, IMF review is here right now in Pakistan. So I feel they will at the end they will give a good report. Why? Because they are more concerned about the financial management, and that Pakistan is doing good, excellent, either excellent. So Pakistan is trying to narrow current account deficit. Pakistan is trying to narrow fiscal deficit. Pakistan is trying to increase the money supply. Pakistan is trying to manage that.
You've been able to curtail the trade deficit for that matter because of the imports. Obviously, they've been discouraged to a certain level. Your dollar, it seems to be comparatively stable also. But Rami Sahab, there's another very important factor. That is about the expectation of the people. You know, when you have too many expectations from the government, and everybody thought that we'll be entering this new phase of new Pakistan, and things will be totally different. There will be no load shedding. Once we'll open our eyes, we'll see something like Malaysia around us. Honestly speaking, it doesn't happen in a year or so.
Look,
and without giving in much. I mean, people on one side, they're not ready to pay taxes. On the other side, they expect Pakistan to become something like Malaysia? For that matter?
Inflation always is not bad. Like when Turkey was going through the reforms, inflation was also high there. But what they did different, they put the equal rather more focus on their production sector. Financial management will not bring you happiness
You
or
talk
the
to
growth.
manufacturers, so they say. I mean, IMF has also shown concern about the tax refunds also for that matter. I mean, there's so many other concerns.
Look, that's what I'm saying. On one side they are imposing something else, on one side, the other side they're talking something good. It's about not talking, it's about the concrete step. What space you are giving to the manufacturing sector.
So normally when you're in a stage like Pakistan is in at the moment, how long normally does it take? Dr. Saber said that it might stay like this for another year, maybe a little more.
No, it's more. Look, Faisal Sahab, we have to stop selling dream to the people, very clearly. So why government is in a fix right now? Because they were selling the dreams. On economic term, you will take at least 2 or 3 years to come out of this cycle. Then you at least need 5 to 8 years to go for the sustainability of your production sector. Here is the problem. Our government, they are not going to put equal emphasis on the industrial and manufacturing sector. That is the sole reason, according to the World Bank, the productivity is going down, that means production is going down. That is creating problem of unemployment, low wages, low trade and low economic growth. One thing. Second thing, our corporate sector have to understand economic growth does not come from capital investment. Economic growth comes from the people who purchase. So they need to identify the real problem and work on that. It's not like that interest rate come down, inflation come down, that's economy is good. No, this is not a thing. Why people are not going to borrowing in Japan or in even there
Their
is
interest rate is
so
pretty low.
Is zero.
Zero, yeah.
And Europe, some countries are negative interest rates. So why they are not going to borrow? The thing is that you have to identify the fundamental. There is a problem with the new liberal economic system. It's not built on the people welfare. It's a built on how I can maximize. In other words, you can say it's about the greed. How can I bring more and more? So fundamentally thing is the capitalist system have to understand, or the people or the corporate sector have to understand, it's not the capital which bring the growth. It's the people. For example, I'll give you one example. If according to the equilibrium model, if the wage rate will increase, that means jobs will decrease. People say like that. But in a Seattle, their government, they did some experiment in some business group. They said, okay, we are increasing the minimum wage rate to $50, $60. They saw there is an increase in their economy. Why? Because when people have more money, they will spend more.
That's a simple equation.
Simple equation, but your new liberal economic system tell your equilibrium other way around. So fundamentally, why China is successful, why China is still growing 6.2% or 6.4%. 6.2% is a huge number for the $14 trillion economy. It's
You
not
can't
a small
expect
number.
it to grow by 11% all
It's
the
not
time,
about,
yeah.
even if Afghanistan is growing by 13%, they will not dream to match them out, even in the 40 years.
I understand your point. Now, another area is about the cash handling. For example, the banks recently said that they'll pay you over 15% interest if you deposit money. So that is another way that Pakistanis are trying to keep that money in Pakistani rupee rather than in dollars. So dollars, I mean, there's a lot of scarcity, but still the pressure on dollar has comparatively decreased over the period of a few months. Because rather everybody believes and everybody says, all these exporters and importers primarily, that when your dollar is stable, I mean, more trade takes place. There's, if it is not stable, there's going to be a problem. So now it seems that it is going to hover around the same mark, ma'am. What sort of a difference do you see that is going to make in the coming months or years?
Exchange rate?
The exchange rate, obviously.
I think exchange rate is
Because
now
we haven't
quite
capitalized
rationalized.
much as far as our exports are concerned, because normally the idea is that, if you devalue your currency, obviously the maximum difference was not even 2%.
No, listen. Keeping the exchange rate artificially at 100 rupees meant that we had to inject a lot of cash. State Bank had to inject cash into the economy to keep that at an artificial rate, which was really hurting us, our current account deficit.
When it was around
So
100, I mean, they had to inject almost $3.2 billion
exactly.
in 6
so
months.
You don't have to do that. So as Ramesh Saab said very rightly, that on the financial discipline front, we are doing very, very well. So I think that whatever the concerns of the IMF should be, it should be about fiscal imbalances, and that's it. The rest of the things, you have to figure it out for yourself. What is the best course of action? Trust me, our space for development budget and development projects is very limited. But still, I think at this point in time, the most important thing is to inspire confidence with the policies which will persist and sustain. Unfortunately, because of these, changes in policies, so-called, there's pressure, and then the entire policy changes. That maybe it's not economic policy, but even on the political front, when we see so-called U-turns, that does not really inspire a lot of confidence. So the government now needs to inspire, or needs to let people know that whatever the policies are, okay, or exchange rate is, or whatever economic incentives that have been given, they will stay there for some time, guarantee that to some extent, restore the expectations and confidence of the investor. Right now, the investor is finding our situation quite attractive, but is hesitant to invest.
If it is attractive and he is hesitant, what's the reason for that?
The reason for that is that the government itself is not inspiring the kind of confidence. It's one-man show in many places, right? Your economic team itself, it was changed in the middle of the year.
Primarily, ma'am?
Yes, lack of trust also. But again, you see the frequent changes in the team. So you see, Board of Investment Chairman Mr. Harun Sharif doing very well, and then all of a sudden resigning. That does not inspire a lot of confidence. Good people need to be retained. They need to stick with the system and given a chance to really perform. Now, I think the most important thing at this point in time is that we trust in our economic managers. They've been given a certain task, so they need the time to do their job well. So we do not need the kind of frequent and sudden changes which keep on happening, right? So hopefully, once this situation, the law and order situation is brought into control, and you have a period of stability, you will see some important changes. But stability is the key at this point in time.
Political stability and economic stability.
Absolutely.
But if you allow me, ma'am, we have been joined by Dr. Waqar Ahmed from STPI. Dr. Saab, Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, ji.
Dr. Saab, I hope all is good at your end. Dr. Saab, talking about the report regarding the IMF and the Pakistan's economic outlook, I'm sure you must have gone through the documents. What do you make out of it, sir?
Well, I think there are two or three things which are very important. While I think IMF seems comfortable with the way Pakistan has sort of handled the external account, which is good because ultimately you have to pass the review in order to qualify for the next steps of the IMF. But equally important is to pinpoint those structural reforms on which Pakistan has been lagging. So I think to start with the first one, IMF has raised the flag regarding the revenue effort, which sort of needs to be fine-tuned. They still feel that there is deficit in our approach, the way we have sort of tried to understand the revenue mobilization effort, due to which you see that the revenue target was also missed. Second key thing which they have flagged is the fact that our effort towards the reduction of circular debt has been suboptimal. They would have liked to see better governance reforms in the energy supply chain. They would have liked to see better reduction in technical losses. And of course, they would have liked to see a clear direction which we want to take regarding the loss-making GenCos and DISCOs, whether that may be privatization or public-private partnership, but some sort of roadmap is much needed. So I think these two issues alone sort of are such a huge huge burden on whatever fiscal deficit that you aim for. Currently, of course, we have sort of shown to them that we are in the safe zone for the primary balance, but when one looks at the overall fiscal position, both these indicators would certainly have implications.
Now, Dr. Saab, another important area is about the future outlook now. Looking at the growth rate, we were just talking about that earlier, 2.4%, lowest in the region. And then the next year, I mean, according to this report, I mean, that is going to be pretty tight also for the economy, for the people. Inflation is almost touching around 13%. What do you make out of that also? For example, unemployment, is it going to go up? Or what exactly do you see happening in the next, let's say, 12 to 16 months?
Yes, so I think two things, Faisal Sab, of immediate nature. If one is to mitigate the impact of this inflation on the poorest of the poor segment, one would really like to see quick execution of the STS program, basically. And currently, we don't see, while the SR strategy has been shared, but we really don't see a quicker execution as one would have liked to see. A second, of course, is that pricing committees, as we have seen, haven't been playing their role. So while, yes, inflationary expectations are at play, one really sees that when it comes to the essential items, the role of pricing committees is missing, which is essential in the short term as well.
All right, thank you very much for your input, Dr. Saab. Now, Ram Saab, another important factor is about because since Pakistan is an oil importing country, the oil prices, the crisis in the Middle East, the ongoing tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia, though Pakistan tried its level best to diffuse that, but still it does exist. And on top, when you look at the kind of recent happenings in Syria, especially the Turkey taking action in their south, and a couple of other reasons as well. For example, if the oil prices, because we couldn't capitalize much when they were around $35, $40 a barrel, now they're going to go up. And if you're talking about economic growth for that matter after a year or so, maybe improvement in that particular regard, I mean, you're talking about more oil import. And the current prices, I think they will definitely pose a huge threat to our economy, sir.
Faisal, we made strategic decisions which was wrong in 1994 when we shifted from hydro toward the fossil fuel. Now, day by day, IPPs, day by day, no contribution of fossil fuel based energy in our sector is, I think, 63% or 67%, I forget the figure. Definitely, any rise in oil prices or some fossil fuel prices, it will impact us directly. But impact on our economy would be dual, because we have depreciated the rupee against dollar. That means if there is one problem, we have increase another dimension to that. It will definitely impact that. But the real question is, would we be able to use at this period or this era to go for the industrial development, agriculture development, or something development of the production sector? When I say, I again focus on the production sector, it is only production sector which give you breathing space, which gives you sustainability, which give you economic growth on the sustainable basis. Otherwise, if you look at that, the late 90s, there was a dot-com bubble in US. So everybody was running after this dot-com business. Suddenly there was a bubble. And then they, again and again history tells us, the crisis of economic crisis most of the time triggered from the financial crisis. Because when the country started to rely more on the financial systems or financing sector, it will bring back to you. Why? Because the financial sector, for example, mortgage in US, it was again a bubble. So we have to understand, if we have to move forward, if we have to fight back, that only sector is a production sector. Production sector doesn't mean only industry. It means your cottage industry, it means your agriculture, it means your fishing, it means your livestock, number of things. You have to go back to the fundamental thing. Because when you talk about this trickle down effect, it really talk about the engagement of people and their jobs and their decent jobs, not the poverty jobs. Minimum jobs mean that is a poverty level job, which you can, even that minimum job is not able to buy the food basket for you for the whole month.
But at least there's some sort of an input.
That's a poverty driven. So when you are, the actions are on opposite side, how you can dream, how you can dream ever think you are moving on the right track.
Now,
Is-
I got your point. Now, another area, because since you were talking about the sector where you have started importing a lot of furnace oil and your dependency on the fossil fuel increased, and obviously since you were an importing country, couldn't keep a check. And that is primarily, there are two reasons for your downfall in that particular sector. One is obviously your dependence on the furnace oil and then the rising prices. And the second, forget about the quality of machinery you were using and what was their output in terms of percentage. Sometimes there was 17, 18%. But sir, the second was, again, about the increasing demand in your country, which you were unable to catch up with. And primarily that was one of the reasons. The prices went up. The cost of doing business was obviously not stable. A lot of people either moved out, there was brain drain, there was flight of capital, and you name it. And this is what happened during the last 10 years or so, despite all the claims made by
petrol.
But what I'm saying is a circular debt. I remember when Nawaz Sharif Saab, exactly 5-6 years ago, took charge, and his finance minister was Ishaq Dar Saab, 504 billion rupees was the circular debt. And I don't know, we heard that around 80-85% was paid to Mia Mohammad Manshah at that time. You know what I'm saying is, and then it was more the next year, and this is a continuous cycle. So almost you're looking at almost $3.5 billion here, sir.
So look, when I say the 1994 policy, IPPs, and then KSC privatization, look at term and conditions. These were strategic mistakes. The guarantees you have given them, the insured you given them, that was not related to the market. It was not market-based guarantees. These companies are doing business in other countries at the lower rates, and you are insuring them higher rates. One thing, second thing, how much government paid after KSC privatization to make their losses, and why
if I'm
they
not
were,
wrong, they still owe you $800 million, correct, sir?
So I don't know the figure, but the thing is
PDCL,
that,
something around
so
that.
the thing is that, so it's your wrong decisions. One thing, Faisal, when I talk about the privatization, last week we discussed it. There are two sources of happiness or the prosperity of every country: government spend, or people have their own sources to spend. For government spending, you need revenue, either through, one option is tax, other option is government also do the business. But when government only rely on the tax, ultimately government has to increase
Their
the
job
taxes.
is not to do business, just facilitate the businessman. I mean,
So,
that is going to be more
there
than
are
enough.
fundamental differences. For example, population is increasing, your demands are increasing. If you are given a concession to the private sector always, and you are privatizing everything, from where you will get the revenue? How? You have to increase the tax. In the long run, those corporations will suffer, because government will not have any other avenue for their own revenue. They have to impose more tax on the people or to the corporate sector. One thing, and second thing, other way is wage, income of the people, what we are talking about, the trickle down effect. You have to increase that. As I already was discussing, it's the people who drive the economic growth. It's not only production, it's us selling or the buying which drive the course. And big organizations, especially multinational companies, are coming to your country. Whenever they feel they have the better conditions in some other countries, they will move there. Like USA multi-corporations, why they are hosting all their big operations in China? USA is fighting these days come back.
Well, let's see. Ma'am, if you allow me,
Yeah.
we've been joined. Just keep your point there.
Okay.
Definitely talk about that also.
No.
We've been joined by Shahbaz Rana Saab, who wrote a very interesting article in Express Tribune, Rising Debt Hinders Pakistan's Growth. Now, Rana Saab, first of all, thank you very much for talking to us in our program. We just went through your this article, sir, which says that rising debt is trying to create problems, hindering basically the growth. Now, sir, let's talk about that. The debt, including the external, your internal debt, put together, we have heard it's more than 70% of the total documented GDP. Correct, sir?
Well, it is even above 80% of the GDP.
Oh, okay. More than 80% as we speak. Now, sir,
Yeah.
what sort of areas Do you think, I mean, Pakistan has the ability or the capacity basically to improve? And where do we totally lack, where we really need a jump start, sir, or rather a kick start, let's put it this way?
Faisal, thank you very much for inviting me and speaking on this issue. Creation of debt itself is not bad. The question is where the money is being spent and for what purpose you are borrowing the new money for your financing needs or for financing of the old debt or for creating big infrastructure development projects. What has been happening over a period of last many years that Pakistan is increasing its debt just to pay off the old debts. And that is a scenario where now more than half of your total revenues, maybe around 60%, are now being used to finance and to repay the previous debts. So that's a situation that the International Monetary Fund has raised in its report that it launched yesterday from Washington that is about the overall Central Asian Middle East region. Because of this situation, Pakistan is now in a situation where about let's say one third, rather 36% of its total budget is spent on the debt servicing, and another about 20 to 25% is given for the defense purposes, and the rest is for the other functions of the state. This leaves very little room for spending on education, on health, and on big infrastructure projects. And since we cannot spend on the big infrastructure projects, our GDP growth is expected to suffer again in this fiscal year. About 2 years back, we were at 5.5% of the GDP growth rate. That slid to 3.3% in the last fiscal year. And why this matters? This is an important question. Why this number matters? For a country like Pakistan that has a population of around 207 million people, and about 60% of them are young, we need a growth rate that should be around 6 to 7% of the GDP to create jobs that are sufficient for these people so everyone is absorbed in the job market. At a growth rate which now is expected to be around 2.4% in this fiscal year, which is equal to your population growth rate, this means there will be more unemployment and there will be more poverty in the country.
So
And this
practically,
is
you're
a
talking about
scenario.
the negative growth. Negative
No,
growth, sir.
no, it is not actually negative growth. Our growth rate is slowing down. It is still positive. We have come down from 5.5% to 3.3% last year, and now we are expected to go down further to 2.4%, but still there will be a growth. We are not in a contraction stage yet, except in the large industries where there is a contraction of 6% during the first 2 months, July, August of
Now,
this
now,
fiscal
now,
year.
Shabazz Rana Sahab, another area I want you to throw light on is about I mean, obviously IMF must have shown a lot of concerns, but what were the areas where they have shown satisfaction also?
Well, as part of overall IMF program, we are implementing the stabilization policies. And under this stabilization policies, we are trying to contain the current account deficit and we are trying to contain the fiscal deficit. On this part, we are doing good. For the first quarter, the July-September period, for which the IMF team is in Pakistan to review the overall situation, we are okay with the fiscal deficit reduction path and with the current account deficit reduction path. So on stabilization, we are good, and the IMF is satisfied with that. The problem areas that the IMF has identified today and the day before is the power sector as well as the tax revenues being collected by the FPR. So this is the problematic area. And these problems are more about the future months instead of the last quarter. So that is the area where now Pakistan and the IMF are focusing how to enhance the revenues. Because we know that the government had to impose about rupees 738 billion in additional taxes in the budget, which is kind of historical that it has never happened in the history of Pakistan to impose that much additional taxes in a single year. But yet we are struggling to achieve our revenue target. And this is an area where there is a need to focus, and they are rightly focusing on this area. And the second point is the power sector. Although the government has made improvements in containing the circular debt, but still it is above the level that has been determined by the International Monetary Fund. So we need to work on this area. Although we have increased the power tariff at least for 3 or 4 times, if you include the quarterly adjustment during
Yeah.
past 1 year, which is quite a huge number.
All right, thank you very much, Rana Saab, for that. Yes, ma'am. Your previous
Yes,
comment.
I am going to
Yeah, go ahead.
comment on the kind of model of the economy which was suggested by Rami Saab. I do agree that you need to understand your economy well and what is the role of the government in that economy and how the government is going to finance itself. So, in my opinion, if you want to use the taxes more wisely or collect fewer taxes, which I agreed, because more taxes collected means there is more of a pressure, and then crowding out also happens. So that all is a negative impact. But another way out of it would be that the size of the government itself should be reduced.
How much money will you save on that?
No. Size of the government, the footprint of the government needs to be reduced. So you're absolutely right. Job of the government is not to, it should be restricted to monitoring, that also with the fewest possible resources and more use of technology. Through that, if the size of the government itself is reduced and it gets out of these state-owned enterprises which can maybe be privatized, then you have a situation where the size of the government itself becomes sustainable. So neither you have to go for, you see, large revenue collections, and the amount of taxes collected can then go into the development budget, because right now the taxes, even the taxes which are being collected, they are being used for non-developmental use to a large extent, and indicators for this is the kind of circular debt that you are seeing. So I mean, a lot of work needs to be done in the efficiency of the government. So for me, that is the most important thing. The efficiency of the government has to improve, and that is where we are seriously lagging. I think Waqar Saab was talking about the absence of price committees. You see, price control committees. And that's so important, and that can really reduce the impact on inflation on the common person, right? So government effectiveness is the area of governance at the moment which I think is the weakest. And if we don't see any improvements in that area, I'm afraid then we are looking towards a bleak future. But if some improvement on ground at the provincial, at the local level, your district administration can do a slightly better job, which for some reason at the moment, because of the incentives or the way the work has been structured, the civil service and the bureaucratic system, this district administration and local level governance is really not functioning properly.
It has never functioned well. It is never, I mean, if this was the case, why do we still depend on them? I mean, you know, we were just talking about the ratios. I mean, obviously, when you look at the debt ratio, debt to the GDP, Rana Saab is right. He said 80%. To be very exact, it's 78.6%. I remember about a decade ago or something, you know, whenever we used to hear about 61%, we would say, oh, it has exceeded the level of 60%. But, you know, then people started giving me examples of Turkey, of Malaysia, of even countries like Japan for that matter. I mean, but I believe that their growth is brilliant because of that particular time period which they've gone through that.
Yes.
And now they are, I mean, they're not into introduction, they are already into the growth. So the point is, when the economy is growing, the systems are perfectly working well for you, then that is the time you need an injection most likely. But in this case, I mean, we're just looking after the debts to get more debt. You get some from here, you steal, you do whatever, and you give one sector. And then there is a riding circle. I mean, there are multiple, I mean, if you go through this, I mean, this is very clear.
See, the point being that you can't run away from your debts. You see, that is why we had to bring IMF on board. You cannot have a well-functioning economy where there is imbalance. So the imbalance needs to be corrected, and nobody's questioning that. Okay, and initially when this new government inherited the economic system, it was on the verge of default. Nobody is questioning that. What I'm saying is that even 2.4,
left everything
even
great.
the growth of 2.4, it will not affect you to that extent if the government effectiveness can improve at the district level. That is my point.
I mean, you're talking about the very basic level, and that's the way it should go up.
Yes.
I mean, and that makes more sense because, whenever we hear about this trickle-down effect, somebody was telling me that during the Reagan's time, this was a taunt, basically. The trickle-down effect, oh, yeah, trickle-down effect. It never works that way. But anyway, I think our masters do believe that, this is the way it is going to work. Shahrukh Aziz Sahib in particular. Last quick comment, sir. When you talk about the current scenario, obviously there are certain areas where you have the potential, but everything is interlinked. I know you're working on one, but you're neglecting another area that is going to affect the first at some stage, sir. Now, quick comment on this particular issue, sir, that the debt, we're talking about the increase in debt from 60% to let's say 80%, 20% jump, that's huge. Other than that, so when you talk about the rupee dollar and the rupee devaluation, I mean, that is another hit which is huge. I mean, 2/3, just imagine if you were like a millionaire, for example, no more a millionaire, all you have in your account is something like 600 million at the moment. That's the key. I mean, over here, sir, things are very different. The purchasing power has gone down a lot.
Look, Faisal, whatever you say, whatever we say, until unless we are not fixing the real problem, we will not move. One thing, I just give one example you can understand. If there is a car, we have to ride on it. We are putting every effort by managing its tires, its bonnet, its everything, but we are not putting engine inside. We will never be able to.
People.
So you will never be able to move. One thing, and second thing, when we talk about the system, what economic system is or what should be, I'm not saying you ban the private sector. Private sector is a key sector to ensure the profitable growth. But I am saying go for the balance of the state-owned enterprises. Why I am saying? You always need non-tax revenue. The economies which don't have the non-tax revenue, they are facing the most advanced countries, they are facing the yellow vest. You have to understand these dynamics. It's not about surface thing. You have to have non-tax revenue. I can give one example which from China, where you must be maybe laughing.
Last 30 seconds, sir.
So China, they had the concept of the town enterpreneurship.
City to city.
In town enterpreneurship. So they gave the chance to the towns, go and thrive for industry, for different things. That is a real devolution. We are talking about something other devolution.
Maybe they have, in fact, reached that optimum level where they can
No,
experiment
from
with such formulas.
78. From 78.
Even then, sir, even right now, do
you know what was the GDP of China in 1952? Few hundred yuan, 200 billion yuan. 600 something like that, but I forget the figure, few hundred yuan. Look at population at that time also, they were crossing the 1 billion.
We should have been around, I think,
so
2 trillion or something.
So thing is that we are not putting the right thing. Why there is so much negativity about the Chinese model?
But anyway,
because
obviously.
The Western people, they are arrogant, they are thinking nobody can develop a better model than them.
That's the problem. Everybody thinks they're smarter than the other. Element of synergy is missing, unfortunately. But anyway, Dr. Saab, thank you very much. It's a pleasure having you, ma'am. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. Take good care. Khuda Hafiz.